Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the HR Check Chat video podcast. And with me today, we have a very special guest. It is Geoff Webb, who is Vice President, Solutions, Product, and Marketing Strategy at isolved. Welcome, Geoff.
Hey, thanks for having me, Brent.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I'm really looking forward to today's podcast. There's a lot of, well, isolved came out with, or is about to come out with a report, and it's called Pause, Pivot, or Plan: HR Trends for 2023. And that's what we're going to focus on today. And I understand there's a lot of really good data in there, and I've had a chance to peruse the report, and I have to agree. And maybe we could start off there. After maybe you just share a little bit about yourself, Geoff, and your role at isolved. Maybe to just give folks kind of a glimpse into what you do and a little bit of context here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. Well, my role at isolved is really to provide a kind of a linkage between, the sort of the strategy for the technology, the software, and the services that we bring to market. And from an isolved perspective, it's very much important for us that we are, we marry both the technology on the one hand and the services that we deliver on the other, all that our partners deliver. Because we strongly believe that technology and services together are really important. That's how you solve a problem. It's not just with throwing technology at it. But again, for that side of the organization, it's to provide that kind of linkage between those things and the rest of the world. So in other words, to both help our business describe more fully and correctly and accurately and pointedly what it is we do and why we're doing it, and what's the sort of, what drives the way that we go to market, the way we think about technology, the way we work with our customers. And also then to provide the sort of the inbound aspect of that, to spend time talking to our customers, which I do a lot, talk to people like yourselves, who are industry thought leaders, who are really looking to the future of the way the technology and the services are delivering solutions to some of the biggest challenges that HR people face today and in the future, and make sure that that information is coming back into isolved so that it continues to shape the direction that we take the things that we do to help our customers be successful. So it's really a sort of a two-way communication role. And from that perspective, it's fascinating. And I get to see sort of the cool new technology. I get to look at the services and things that we and our partners are delivering. And I also get to talk to customers and thought leaders and influencers like yourselves on what's interesting and what's going to be driving the future. So it's a great job. I love the job. I got to be honest.
It sounds like a great job. And to be frank, we really enjoy speaking with folks like you on the solution provider side of things, and especially with isolved. To be completely candid, you folks are really on top of things in terms of having your pulse on the market and projecting the right kind of brand, in my opinion, as an analyst. And I, speaking with customers is so important, and I know this is a little bit of a tangent from what we want to talk about today, but I think it's worth just underscoring. That's so important for a vendor to really understand their users and what their needs are, and to be developing your own solution based on that, sort of, instead of in a bubble or in a vacuum. And we've spoken with a lot of isolved customers ourselves here at 3Sixty Insights, and all users of other vendor solutions. So we also like to kind of bring that insight into what we do and the thought leadership that we develop. So yeah, very interesting stuff. Now, this is actually a great segue into the report, which again is called Pause, Pivot, or Plan: HR Trends for 2023. Can you tell us just a little bit about the survey and just the report in general? I know we have a few things we want to dive into here.
Sure.
Lots of interesting stuff.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, it is. It's a great survey, and when we actually publish the full results, I strongly recommend anybody to take a look at it. I think it's actually quite fascinating, and I think we're at a sort of a pivotal point, I think, in between what has happened in the world of employment, the changing sort of way people think about their jobs, their expectations, and the way that businesses think about and interact with employees, the way that had been and what is to come, right? And I think, we've seen the pandemic as a forcing factor and an accelerant in a lot of the changes. We're sort of post-pandemic. We've seen the great resignation that occurred as a result of things that happened during the pandemic itself. I think we're now at the sort of the post-great resignation world, and I think we're into what is next. And as a result, I think this survey is a really interesting window into the experience of employees as they think about what's happening now within the context of what's happened in the past, but also what's going to happen in the future. So we do this. It's funny. We were just talking about it, in the importance of talking to customers, and as a company, you have to stay grounded in the reality of the day-to-day lives of the people who you're working for, right? Which is our customers. In this case, we survey. It's a shade less than 1,000 employees across the US in almost every industry that you can think of. So there's a very broad range of industries, everything from retail to healthcare to legal services to manufacturing and so on and so on. And really ask a range of questions around their experience, what's important to them right now, how do they feel about their employer, how do they feel about the nature of their work, and so on. Again, there's a really good insight into what's happening today, but also as we think about both the past and the future and the trends that we're seeing emerging in both both post-pandemic and post-Great Resignation world.
Yeah, I like what you're saying there about sort of we've just exited. I think you're right. The Great Resignation.
Yeah.
Or let's put it this way: the phase of time that can be defined as a Great Resignation. There's still a lot of resignation going on.
Oh,
and that's
yes.
actually something, but it's not, and now it's become par for the course almost. And one of the things is that's so compelling about some of the findings in this report is how they trying to reconcile them with some of the other things going on, the macroeconomic conditions. Because we're not exactly in a booming economy right now, but it's kind of I'll use the words. It almost seems like kind of a schizophrenic economy. I hope it's okay that I use that word, but it's some of it is kind of booming or not booming, and some of it is some other pockets having some problems. And we saw some big layoffs in like the big top tier global tier high tech companies, but then there are a lot of other companies in high tech software that are hiring. There are other pockets of the market space that and the market in general that are hiring and having a talent shortage. So it's interesting. One of the findings was that I think 2022, this was conducted in Q4 of 2022, I believe, correct?
Right. It was right at the end of last year, and so right at the beginning, finishing up right at the beginning of this year.
Yeah, so we were seeing essentially the same sort of news that we're seeing now around economic conditions. And so we saw, just shy of 50%, according to this survey, of employees that are tempted to look for a new job. I guess you could say they could be tempted even though they're thinking, well, I wonder if there really is one out there. But that's actually not changed all that much coming into this year as well. So
right.
What are your thoughts around all of that? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's funny. You're right. It hasn't changed a lot. If anything, it blipped up ever so slightly. I think it was like 47% the previous year, and it's like 49% going into this year. So it's relatively consistent. I'm not sure you can draw a lot of conclusion from a 2% change, but it's certainly not showing any decline. Certainly not any significant decline. So it remains the case that employees are still very, very much open to and aware of the possibilities out there in the market of changing jobs, changing the role that they're in, looking for more or looking for different. And I think, it's fair to say, we are past the sort of the Great Resignation, but to your point, exactly, it doesn't mean that resignations are finished. The Great Resignation was almost that moment in time when we woke up and went, oh, wait, not only have we been saying that employee expectations are changing and there's a future to work that is going to be somewhat different, but here it is. Like, it was the arrival, I think, of the changes that are occurring in the way people think about work and their expectations. So, yeah, the Great Resignation wasn't just a moment when a whole bunch of people resigned and then went to look for another job. It was the event horizon, if you will, of crossing into a new world of, okay, this is actually what it's going to be like. And my sense is that we're going to see this sort of this perspective continue for some time yet. And I don't even know what drives a change in, in that sort of awareness and openness to looking for new jobs. But it has a whole bunch of, I think it has a whole bunch of drivers as to why people are looking for new roles and new jobs, looking to change what they do. And I think it ultimately itself drives a lot of changes in the way that businesses are going to have to think about the relationship between employer and employee, the role of HR in the business, the way that they invest in those things, what things they invest in, even how they understand the things that they should be investing in. I think that is what we will see now begin to really change over the next year or 2 years, is a reevaluation and a reawakening, almost a renaissance in rethinking about the role of, that relationship between employer and employee.
Yeah. Oh, a couple of terms you used there: renaissance, and also event horizon. Thank you for that one, because I think that really that does really capture it. We say cross the Rubicon, or inflection
Oh, that one
point,
too. Yep, always good for that one.
which analysts say way too much inflection point. So, event horizon. I'm going to steal that. But in any event, one thing, this you'll actually laugh. I've had a draft blog entry for the longest time, and I just kind of abandoned it because it took a long time to write, and it didn't seem to I couldn't get the the turnaround at the end. But I was calling it The Great Expectations.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it was a play on the book by Charles Dickens, but
Yep.
it was also, but I noticed you saying their expectations just now, and I did actually notice in another report by isolved earlier in the year
Mm-hmm.
that phrase was used, employees' expectations. I thought, Eureka, there's something there. So I may yet complete this blog entry at some point, but there are new expectations.
Mm-hmm.
That calculus that sort of defines the employee-employer dynamic, I think,
Sure.
is forever changed. We have, pendulum always swings way in one way and then it comes back a little bit, but it's never
Mm-hmm.
going to go back to what it was before, where, economic conditions turn for the worse. And it's definitely, let me put it this way: I don't think we're ever going to be in an absolute higher employers market versus candidates market ever again. I think it's going to be much more sort of a combo,
Mm-hmm.
and it'll be a little bit one direction versus the other, but we're not going to see these stark differences. What do you think?
Yeah, my suspicion is certainly for the foreseeable future, which could be a very long time. I think there's much more of a sort of an equality, an equitable nature to the relationship. I think that has been proven that, the changes that have been occurring for the past, I would go back even say, 100 years or more between employees and employers have sort of grown to fruition. And it was like kind of like if I could use a sort of a gardening analogy, you put the seed in the ground, and after a while, it reaches a point where the seed case breaks and that little sapling shoots up and starts to grow. I think the pandemic was that moment when that seed case broke open, and all of that pent up energy of people's expectations and what they want from work, and the application of technology and the nature of the internet and everything else sort of all came together to drive this, this new sort of flowering of a new approach and new thinking around, well, this is actually what I want from work, and employers going, well, this is how we're going to do that in order to keep the good people that we need to keep. I think it could be a long time before we see as significant a change. You think about the role of artificial intelligence in the workplace, and we see the sort of lot of conversations around, the sort of the technologies that are out there right now grabbing headlines in their capabilities that have the potential to move the pieces around a little bit. But I think fundamentally that relationship has changed and probably will not change back for any, potentially within any of our lifetimes. I think a new stability has reached in the way that people interact. I think the things that they care about, the things that they expect from their employer, and the way that employers meet those expectations will continue to evolve, and probably have to continue to evolve.
Mm. Yeah, I think absolutely. And you know what is interesting is how the employee experience plays into this, right? And I know
Mhm.
in the report that that iSolve sort of sets forth some ideas around that, in terms of trends
Yeah.
reflective of the of. Could you just delve into those a little bit for us?
Yeah. Yeah, we saw. So when we looked at the results we were getting back, again, we're asking a lot of employees a lot of questions around, their view of the world. And really what we're looking at here is a way to synthesize the results back into something that makes sense for HR professionals, employers, and so on, to sort of start to look at what are we hearing, and what are the consistent themes running through this. We really sort of four areas that we felt were worth focusing in on. The first was your talent acquisition, right? And I think that's probably not a great surprise to anybody, but it becomes so important to put in place the right things to understand why people stay, to understand what motivates them, to not not go looking, and if they do look, to make sure that you still become the most attractive place to stay. And so we really saw a lot of, look, there's advice we can give, and there's things that we can talk about around that talent acquisition that are so important. If you lose people, you're back to a whole bunch of work and a whole bunch of pain. The best employee that you recruit is the employee you don't have to go and replace, right? Let's keep the people that are good people. The second was really to and this comes out of some of the drivers of that retention, is investing in employees themselves, in their ability to develop, in their ability to become to sort of enrich their experience, enrich their career, get more training and development skills, upskilling. And we've seen a lot of conversation, a lot of interest in learning and skill development and training and so on, and sort of building career paths through training, which I think again is really important when you're thinking about why people stay. It is, the employees tend to give employers a relatively poor score when it comes to skill development and sort of career pathing. So it's a great way to attack that problem early. And then the other is to the sort of the third trend was really around focusing in on the sort of the softer aspects, the sort of the work-life balance, expectations, how mental health, physical health, and so on, things that have always, I think, been important to people, but now they're being very vocal about, and we're seeing those as drivers of change of your employees. So I think we saw a lot of commentary in those areas. How do we provide a better employee experience when it comes to the softer side of the business, culture, experience, work-life balance, and so on. And then the fourth one was around the use of tools to better understand what's really going on. In other words, if you're going to do all of those things, be focused, be targeted, be driven by data, dig into an understanding of what's actually driving those behaviors, so that you can use analytics to spot things that you might otherwise miss. This is especially true for typically overworked and swamped HR teams who are just trying to get through the day. It's very easy to miss emerging trends in employee behaviors. Are we drifting in certain areas that we shouldn't be? Are there certain problems becoming real for us as an organization? Are we starting to, our costs spiraling, et cetera? Analytics enables you to sort of see those things early, and then put in place the changes that you need to put to address them before they become an actual business problem for you.
Well, that's really interesting. That's super interesting. Some of those trends that you mentioned, and one of the things that I think I heard you say was around tending. This is not the exact wording you used, but tending to what employees crave. Yeah, that actually fits into some of the other findings that I noticed on this in this report. What really struck me was, there's one area where they said the question was, what do I like most about my job? And it was relationships, my relationships with my coworkers. It was number one. It was some high percentage that escapes me at the moment. And then a relatively low percentage was the employer culture.
Yeah.
And that was a really interesting one for me. First of all, in terms of what employees crave, but also what's the difference?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's interesting. I spotted that too. I think um, often employees perceive, their company culture as kind of the thing that they are handed. It's like, you join a company and you're told, well, our culture is XYZ. This is what our culture is. And it's kind of like, well, if you have to tell people what your culture is, maybe it's not your culture. Like, that's there was the whole remember the story about the Spartans, right? That they would never write down the law,
Mhm.
because their belief was if you had to read the laws, you probably weren't going to obey them. So there was kind of like, it was inculcated in them from young child that this is the law and these are the things that you do as a person. And I feel the same way a little bit about culture. It's kind of like, if you have to tell people what your culture is, it's probably not as embedded in the employee experience as you probably think it is. Like, the culture is something that really comes through the everyday experience. It is the minute by minute experience. I always say this about employee experience overall. It's extremely difficult to get right, and it's extremely difficult to be consistent about employee experience.
Mm.
Customer experience, where businesses invest a vast amount of money, we interact with our customers, in a fairly sort of punctuated way. You sort of have an interaction for a while and then you don't. An employee experience is every minute of every day, including even when they're not working for you directly. It's like, that's an employee experience, and it's really challenging. And culture's kind of like that. Culture is, the experience of working at a place. It isn't the thing that's on the motivational poster in the lunchroom. And
Mhm.
so, I think what we're seeing is it's, the employees are referencing the fact, look, I love working with my employees, my fellow employees, my co-workers. This is what keeps me here, which I think is true, right? I think, the experience of working with other people is what um, is what great companies facilitate. Really good company cultures actually build on employees supporting each other, on delivering an experience that is sort of, authentic and real, and exists in the day in, day out. I think those people that are saying, I don't like my company culture, it's probably because it's not real, it's not authentic, it's not part of their daily experience. It's something they've been told in an email, this is your company culture, and it probably isn't.
That's a great point because how many employers work, go out of their way to sort of promote and establish a scary culture or a culture that's not, does that make sense? Yeah,
Absolutely, yeah.
yeah. It's to me, a bad culture festers, whatever it is.
Hmm.
Well, there's always a culture, and it will fester and become whatever it's going to be, which probably isn't good, or has is apt not to be good without intentionality behind it from leadership at the organization.
Yeah, I agree. Bad cultures are really what, it's to a degree, as bad a behavior as they're prepared to accept and leave in place. And
Mm.
I think, and I think we've all seen those companies, and maybe some of us have even worked at them, where, the sort of senior leadership goes off site for a week and comes back and says, oh, okay, we've decided what our company culture is. And you're like, no, that's not how this works. Like, your company culture is what happens minute by minute, day in, day out, in the interactions between the employees and the employer, between, the things that actually happen in your business. That's the reality of your culture. And it is an aggregate of a whole bunch of smaller elements. It isn't a thing that you are told. There should be rules, there should be standards of behavior, there should be objectives, and there should be guiding principles. But culture happens. Culture isn't enforced.
Right, right. That's the way to put it right there. And you know what? I think this does provide a nice sort of segue into the next question that I have around the report. The report references some survey findings of yours from last year,
Hmm.
of HR leaders, and they were putting it right through 2022. They were putting a really high level of prioritization on the employee experience, which is great. I mean, that's really important.
Yeah.
But then we have this high percentage of employees that are contemplating or tempted to look elsewhere for employment. Uh,
Hmm.
so, I think it begs the question, how does what kind of reflection is this on HR organizations' efforts in the employee experience realm? I mean, this might kind of this might feed back into the four themes that we were talking about a
Yeah.
moment ago, but I'm just curious your thoughts there.
Yeah, I think a couple of things I would say. One of the things that the report does highlight is there's a significant portion of employees think that there isn't much of a focus on employee experience. I think it's almost like a third of employees said, my company doesn't really prioritize employee experience, and about half of them say that actually it's at least it's at best average and often poor, right? So there's, I think there is a long way to go to build good employee experience. I also think, in defense of businesses and HR teams, to a degree, employees are figuring out what a good employee experience is too. It's not like I think everybody knows intuitively exactly what they need. To a degree, we're still learning as employees. I think you look back at the experience of going hybrid, and I think people's expectations of, working from home all of the time actually were very different from the reality of working from home all the time. And I think, we as human beings are not always very straightforward. We don't always know exactly what it is that makes us happy. We're not always, and it's not always the same thing. It's not always consistent. So I think businesses and HR professionals, specifically, have been working very hard, at least in a good number of cases, to understand what drives good experience, and then to build a good experience in. It takes time to do both, and the challenge that you have is that while you're understanding what people think is a good employee experience, those people's understanding may be changing too. What they want to see may be evolving itself. So it's kind of a little bit of a moving target. So I think there's been a good amount of work put into building a good employee experience. We're clearly not there yet. And I think we need to continue to track. What matters, I think, in the end, is not somehow that we go, we've invested enough, we've delivered a good employee experience, we're all happy, let's just go on with our lives. It is actually the mindset. It is the evolution of the mindset that says we must continually track and understand, which is part of the findings of the report, right? We must invest in the ability to understand what drives a good employee experience, and we must continually focus on improving and changing that employee experience to meet those evolving demands. It isn't the delivery of a good employee experience that counts so much right now. It is the capacity to always be tracking and moving towards a good employee experience, because, as we've said, the changes aren't over, right? We're sort of we did cross that event horizon, and I think changes will continue. We have to be equipped and have the sort of the culture, if I can use that loosely, given the conversation we just had, that says actually we care about employee experience and we'll keep investing in it. And I think that's the change that we're seeing. I talk to a lot of our customers, and they are very invested in employee experience. It's a case of, but it takes time to get there, and what matters to employees changes and evolves, and so they're constantly bringing their business with them to deliver good employee experience.
You shared so much wisdom there. Honestly, it's really important not to sort of impose an employee experience that you think,
Right.
as good as you think it sounds in your head, right? Or as a department. It's important to understand what a good employee experience is, from the perspective of the workforce.
Yep.
And that makes a lot of sense. I actually hadn't thought of that till just now. So thank you. Just this idea that we are still understanding what a good employee experience is. We have our hypotheses, we have our hunches, but it really takes some understanding. And it occurred to me, just as you were sharing that maybe part of providing a good employee experience, maybe striving to understand what it means to your workforce, and showing that receptivity to understanding it from their perspective is part of providing the good employee experience right now.
I think that's absolutely right. In fact, I think that's a great point. It's sort of a recognition of, look, we may not be perfect, but actually what matters to you matters to us. And I think therefore, as a result, that we see a lot of investment in energy and thinking around a couple of things. One of them is analytics. Not surprising, because HR teams want to understand what's really mattering to their employees, and where do they focus their efforts. The second, I think, is in engagement. of measurement and engagement. How do I, am I going to survey my employees? How do I talk to them? How do I engage them day in, day out? Because I need to build that sort of that conversation. It's a little bit like raising a teenager. You kind of have to start early to build a culture of having the conversations backwards and forwards, even when the conversations are the tough ones, like no, you can't borrow the car, or you have to be home by 9 o'clock. You kind of have to build that muscle memory of having the constant conversations and tuning. And I think that's something that's really important. Is if think of employees understand, and again, speaking as an employee, right? If I believe that not only is my employer asking for the things that matter to me, but then striving to work towards those things, that becomes a very, very different environment and relationship than one in which they don't appear to care. They might be doing things, but they're not necessarily doing the things that I care about. If you can talk to me, ask me, and show me that you're actually making an effort, that actually goes a long way to establishing a degree of trust. And trust is a great foundation, if not the only foundation, for building a really good culture of employees and employers.
Yeah. Took the words right out of my mouth. I'm so glad you mentioned that, the trust piece. When you're showing that you're showing interest in your work, in each of your employees' thought, ideas and perspectives on what is a good employee experience, you're establishing trust. And you're also showing empathy, which is really important. We hear about it, and I think back to like the old Mad Men show, and those guys might have laughed at the idea of showing empathy at work, right? But I mean, but it is so important today. You just cannot be a good leader without it. You can't run a good organization without leaders in it that are showing empathy, that can exercise empathy, have that capacity.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that we tend to equate empathy with weakness, or lack of conviction, or a whole bunch of other things. So, and it's not actually. Empathy is an incredible commitment. It's a huge amount of energy is required, and it takes real strength to understand that this is the perspective of other people. It doesn't mean you have to do everything that they want. It doesn't mean that you become subservient to their drives. But without empathy, you can't manage people. You just can't effectively. You certainly can't lead people effectively. And as a business, you can't understand what motivates your employees. That's the definition of what really good empathy is about. Like, what is driving the things that you care about, and so that I understand them. So I think establishing trust, demonstrating empathy, and then ultimately putting some energy into delivering what employees want is how you move the needle on those number of employees that believe you have a good employee experience and care about it. And that is how you move the needle on the number of employees that are talking about looking for a new job this year. That's how you start to drive that down.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And not to not to be too abrupt here, but you got to have the right technology in place too in order to be able to do all these things. You might have the desire, the strong will to exercise great empathy with your workforce, and to listen to them, and to understand their engagement, and to and you want these analytics, but if you have the wrong technology in place, you're going to have a really tough time, especially with the new sort of emerging or emergent work scenario circumstances that work from home, work from anywhere, these sorts of things.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's a combination of, it's how the technology needs to be in place to enable you to connect with and establish that connection, maintain a connection and engagement, and then understand the behaviors. I also think that the other part of this that needs to be remembered is, that technology ultimately has to operate on itself on data and understanding, right? That you need to, HR organizations have usually vast amounts of information in all of the worst possible places, right? It's usually like it's in paper files, it's in cabinets, it's in Excel spreadsheets, it's in Word documents, it's in Post-it notes, and those things are not easy to aggregate and understand. So I think, when we see organizations developing and going through the sort of the growth and maturity that enable them to attack some of these challenges around reducing turnover and reducing those number of employees looking for another job and delivering a better employee experience, the first place they usually have to start is, well, let's at least get all of your information in one place. Because if you don't do that, you stand very little chance in understanding what's driving the behaviors that ultimately you wish to engage with in order to shape, right? So it's technology, absolutely, but there's also a real need to have let's get the information in one place so that we can start to understand it better. and make good decisions that ultimately are strategic decisions that really respond to the environment that we're working in.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I'm looking at the time, and we're actually almost out of it. So that's, but I'll be
Always.
honest with you, that was a great. I mean that if we land on that, I mean this has been a great episode, and thank you so much, Geoff, for all of your your insight, and really excited to see this report once it is
Yep.
live. Do you have any idea when that exactly is going to be?
I think it's very, very soon. I don't have the exact date, but I think it's, we're talking about days, if not weeks at most. So I think it's very, very soon it's coming out. It's certainly ready to go, I think. And I would, again, as soon as it comes out, I would recommend grabbing it because it really does have some great insights in it.
Yeah, well, sure. Looking forward to it. Maybe we'll be able to include the link in when this podcast goes live. And thanks so much, Geoff. Thanks so much, Geoff. It's a
Oh,
pleasure
thank you,
having
Brent.
you.
Yeah, no, I loved it. Thank you so much. Always great to talk to you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Likewise. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.